Fewer than 24 hours after Donald Trump abruptly paused all U.S. military aid to Ukraine, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is calling his Oval Office spat with the president regrettable. In a new post on X, he reiterates Ukraine's commitment to peace, writing, quote, "None of us wants an endless war." He adds that Ukraine is ready to come to the negotiating table. And although Zelensky doesn't use the post to directly apologize to Trump, as some White House officials have argued he should do, he did express his gratitude for U.S. support, something he has done frequently, including during an address to Congress the first time he visited the United States as president of Ukraine after Russia invaded the country. White House officials say the pause in aid will stand until President Trump determines Zelensky is serious about working out a peace plan and a path to end the war with Russia. Losing assistance from the United States, especially its Patriot missile defense system, could have dire consequences for Ukraine. The Prime Minister of Ukraine says it's the only tool the country has to protect itself from Russian ballistic missiles. Joining us now to discuss is retired U.S. Army Major Mike Lyons. Sir, thank you so much for being with us. Right off the bat, what is the effect of this pause in U.S. aid to Ukraine on the battlefield?
Well, Boris, I don't see any positive outcomes from this change here. I think tactically, I always look through the eyes of the soldier and how they view this. And I think if they get this news at the front lines, they're going to be disappointed in the United States. I think right now the front lines are focused on drone warfare as well as artillery fire and artillery ammunition. So if you're a cannoneer on the front lines, you're looking at that pallet of ammunition behind you, wondering if it's going to be replaced. So I think in some ways, the tactical implications are somewhat limited, and they might not be impactful for, let's say, the next few weeks. But over time, as air defense platforms degrade and they shoot missiles down and they're shooting things down that they're not being reinforced there, I think there's going to be real problems with the Ukraine military trying to keep up to what's going on.
To your point about seeking that next pallet of ammunition, how much longer do you think Ukraine has to sustain that artillery and ballistic missile defense without U.S. help?
Well, they likely have months, not necessarily weeks. And as again, they've built some defenses up themselves. But what will happen is Russia will look to go on the offensive and try to break through in certain areas and weaken Ukraine defenses and force them to play economy of force missions and to reinforce areas where they might not want to. It'll clearly keep them on the defense. We just also know specifically what this means, the fact that we're not giving military support. You know, you've got European soldier commands training soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers in Vilsek and Grafenwehr and places. Does that mean that training stops for them as well? What about intel? What about other things that the United States has been providing? So again, there's a short-term impact. What will happen tactically on the ground? Obviously, we know the strategic impacts over the long run. Ukraine would be able to sustain any kind of defenses against Russia if this lasts very much longer.
How far do you think European backing, the EU's backing, can go without that backstop of the United States?
Unfortunately, the European industrial base, it won't crank up fast enough to help Ukraine. It's going to take a year or so in order for some of the more advanced European defense contractors to provide any kind of material that will help Ukraine. The United States has the war footing right now with the amount of artillery ammunition that we're supplying with them. It's increased over the past few years, and Europe won't be able to backstop that. So that's where there's a race against time right now. The United States needs to continue to support Ukraine, at least right now for these negotiations. Look, Donald Trump doesn't know whether Russia wants to stop. He knows he wants Ukraine to stop. He knows he wants the war to stop. But we don't know whether he knows Russia wants to stop. And I think this mineral deal will help put in implied security assurances for Ukraine. But the question is going to be, what are Russian demands in order for Ukraine to stop? They might be too much. And perhaps this will cause this administration to turn around and send more military aid to Ukraine as the Russians still have a voice as to whether or not this conflict will end as well.
Major Mike Lyons, appreciate your point of view. Thanks for joining us.
And back to our top story this hour, Donald Trump's suspension of all U.S. military aid to Ukraine. That includes critical ammunition, advanced weapons, as well as military vehicles. Most significantly, it also includes Patriot air defense missiles. Those US-provided weapons have been a game changer, really, for Ukraine, allowing it to protect its skies from Russian attacks. Now, Kyiv is saying it could run out of them just in a matter of weeks. Europe is scrambling to adjust to this new reality. The EU is pledging a new $150 billion loans program to help countries in the bloc boost the defense spending and increase their support for Ukraine. And it comes as the Trump administration is trying to get Kyiv to sign a rare minerals deal with the US and a peace deal with Russia. Just take a listen to US Vice President J.D. Vance speaking on Fox News.
If you want real security guarantees, if you want to actually ensure that Vladimir Putin does not invade Ukraine again, the very best security guarantee is to give Americans economic upside in the future of Ukraine. That is a way better security guarantee than 20,000 troops from some random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 or 40 years.
Well, CNN's Claire Sebastian takes a look now at the role the US weapons have played in Ukraine's war effort and whether Kyiv and Europe can make up the shortfall. Have a look at this.
A US long-range ATACMS missile in action in Ukraine, just one of the highly sophisticated US weapons arguably keeping Ukraine in this fight now in doubt. Well, it's clear that the US has become an indispensable player in Ukraine's defense. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky estimated in January that the US alone provides about 40%, you can see it there on the red section, of Ukraine's annual weapons requirements. Europe takes about 30%, but Ukraine has also ramped up production, up here in orange, ready to supply, the president says, around a third of its own needs. Well, that's up compared to 10%, Zelensky says, at the start of the war. So you can see the growth there. And if you take a look at this chart, you can see Ukraine has had to grapple with unpredictable US supplies before. This shows total donations from the US versus Europe, the US there in red. It's compiled by the Kiel Institute for the World Economy. And it's clear that the US started to lag significantly in the second half of 2023. That was when military aid stalled in Congress. It then picked up again towards the end of 2024 as the Biden administration rushed to use up all of the congressionally approved funds. This is not just about quantity. It's clear that it's the high-tech US weapons that have given Ukraine really the ability to fight back, from the HIMARS missiles launchers that started arriving in June of 2022, allowing Ukraine to hit behind Russian lines, to then the Patriot air defense systems approved in December of that year. Still, Ukraine says, the only system that can stop Russian ballistic missiles. This now the biggest area of concern for Ukraine as Russia ramps up air attacks. And then, of course, the ATACMS longer-range missiles, first used in October of 2023 and last November, authorized by the Biden administration for use on Russian soil. Now, if we look at the frontline map, you can see where we are now. Shortages won't be immediate, but without a deal to reverse this decision, this already fragile front line could be in serious jeopardy. Claire Sebastian, CNN, London.